Call 911 now. Sophia Morales' voice sliced through the chaos of the Langley Mansion's dining room, her brown eyes blazing as she knelt beside Eleanor, guiding her through preterm labor. Her long black hair, neatly pinned in a bun at the nape of her neck, framed her steady hands. A Mexican maid turned savior in a world that scorned her. Moments ago, she was accused of spilling wine, a lie that burned. But now she held life itself in her grip. Her courage would unravel a family's darkest secrets, exposing a stolen legacy that shook Newport's elite. This is no ordinary tale. It's a firestorm of resilience, where a woman dismissed as nothing reshapes an empire. Sophia's journey will grip you, from betrayal to triumph, revealing a truth that echoes beyond the waves. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share where you're listening from, Newport, New York, or beyond. Her legacy awaits, burning bright. Clumsy girl, you've ruined the evening. Charlotte Langley's voice sliced through the hum of the Newport Mansion's dining room, her blonde curls bouncing with venom. Sophia Morales froze, her hands gripping the silver tray, the crimson stain of spilled wine pooling on the marble floor like a fresh wound. The air crackled with the weight of accusation, the eyes of Newport's elite boring into her brown skin. Charlotte's elbow had clipped Sophia's arm, sending the glass crashing, but the blame landed squarely on the 28-year-old Mexican maid. "Do you know how much that crystal costs?" Charlotte snapped, her green eyes glinting with disdain. "More than you'll ever see in your Orchard Town life." Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding so hard her temples throbbed. The guests' laughter stabbed like shards of glass, each chuckle a reminder of her place in their world. A servant, an outsider, a shadow in their gilded realm. Margaret Langley, the matriarch, leaned forward, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's glow, her pearl earrings swaying like pendulums of judgment. "This is what happens when you hire charity cases," she said, her voice smooth as polished steel, cutting deeper than Charlotte's outburst. "Sophia, was it? You're a walking disaster." Sophia's pulse hammered, her knuckles whitening around the tray. She wanted to scream that it was Charlotte's fault, that the blonde heiress had bumped her in a careless twirl, but words caught in her throat like thorns. Her parents' faces flashed in her mind, her father's calloused hands picking fruit under a blazing California sun, her mother's fingers bleeding from late-night sewing to fund her nursing certificate. She'd come to Newport to support them, not to be mocked. Eleanor Langley, her mistress, sat silent, her lavender gown pristine, her green eyes fixed on her plate. James, Eleanor's husband, cleared his throat but said nothing, his blue gaze darting to his mother for approval. Their silence burned worse than the insults, a betrayal that twisted Sophia's gut. "You'd think a maid would know better," Charlotte continued, her voice a whip. "What's next, Sophia? Dropping the lobster bisque?" The guests snickered, their cufflinks flashing like tiny stars. Sophia's chest tightened, her breath shallow, but she forced her hands to move, grabbing a cloth to mop the wine. "I'm sorry, Miss Langley," she muttered, her voice low, steady, a shield against their scorn. But inside, fury roared, a fire fed by years of sidelong glances and whispered slights about her Mexican roots. As she knelt, scrubbing the stain, Margaret's voice cut again. "Hurry up, girl. You're embarrassing us." Sophia's fingers trembled, the cloth soaking red, her heart pounding with the urge to stand and walk out. She was done. Done with their condescension, done with this gilded cage. But before she could rise, a sharp cry shattered the room. Eleanor clutched her belly, her face ashen, her lavender gown darkening with fluid. "My water broke," she gasped, her voice raw with panic. The guests froze, glasses clinking in startled hands. Sophia's head snapped up, her nursing instincts kicking in like a switch. She dropped the cloth, the wine forgotten, and rushed to Eleanor's side, her hands steady despite the chaos. "Eleanor, look at me," she commanded, her voice a lifeline, calm and authoritative. "Breathe slow. I've got you." Her fingers found Eleanor's wrist, pulse racing but stable. "She's in preterm labor, 32 weeks, Sophia barked. "Call 911 now." A butler scrambled, his footsteps echoing. The guests' whispers rose. "Is she a doctor?" "No, just the maid." But Sophia shut them out, her focus laser sharp. She guided Eleanor to a cushioned bench, her hands moving with a nurse's precision, timing contractions. With two swift pushes, a tiny cry pierced the air, a girl fragile but alive. Sophia caught the infant, cleared her airway, and wrapped her in a clean cloth, placing her on Eleanor's chest. "She's okay," Sophia said, her voice soft but resonant. "You did it." The room stilled, the guests' eyes wide, their phones already glowing with the story. Sophia stood, her uniform stained, her heart pounding, but her resolve unbroken. Sophia Morales stood tall, her maid's uniform creased and stained with sweat, the newborn's cry still echoing in the Langley mansion's dining room. Eleanor Langley clutched her baby girl, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, her lavender gown a crumpled testament to the crisis Sophia had just mastered. The Newport elite stared, their champagne flutes forgotten, their whispers a mix of awe and disbelief. "She saved them," one murmured. "The maid?" Another hissed, their voices sharp as knives. But Sophia's heart pounded not with pride but with a raw, burning wound. The sting of Charlotte's false accusation, Margaret's icy scorn, and the deafening silence of Eleanor and James. Charlotte stepped forward, her blonde curls limp, her green eyes flickering with unease. "Sophia, that was incredible," she stammered, her voice thin, a fragile attempt at gratitude. Margaret, her silver hair still perfect, cleared her throat, her pearl earrings catching the chandelier's glow. "Yes, well done, Sophia," she said, her tone clipped, as if the words pained her. "You've surprised us all." The praise was a blade, coated in condescension, implying Sophia's heroism was an anomaly, not her essence. Sophia's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding until her temples ached. Her brown eyes locked onto Margaret's, then Charlotte's, unflinching. "I didn't save her for you," she said, her voice low, steady, cutting through the room like a scalpel. "I saved her because it's who I am." The words landed like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs. Her hands, still warm from cradling the infant, clenched into fists. She thought of her parents, her father's sun-scorched hands picking fruit, her mother's needle-pricked fingers sewing late into the night. Their sacrifices had forged her, not the Langley's charity. Eleanor, still trembling, reached out. "Sophia, thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. James nodded, his blue eyes darting nervously, but he said nothing, his silence a fresh betrayal. Sophia's chest burned, the weight of the spilled wine, Charlotte's lie, and their earlier mockery pressing down. She turned, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her movements deliberate, a warrior's grace. The silver ring, etched with CL, weighed heavily in her pocket, unnoticed by the crowd, but a quiet anchor to her resolve. As she reached for her coat at the door, the guests' eyes followed, their phones glowing with the story of the maid who'd turned chaos into life. Sophia didn't look back. Her words hung in the air, a vow of her worth, a prophecy of her strength. "I'm done here," she said, her voice barely audible but heavy with finality. The door loomed before her, a threshold to freedom, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. Sophia Morales stood tall, her maid's uniform creased and stained with sweat, the newborn's cry still echoing in the Langley mansion's dining room. Eleanor Langley clutched her baby girl, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, her lavender gown a crumpled testament to the crisis Sophia had just mastered. The Newport elite stared, their champagne flutes forgotten, their whispers a mix of awe and disbelief. "She saved them," one murmured. "The maid?" Another hissed, their voices sharp as knives. But Sophia's heart pounded not with pride but with a raw, burning wound. The sting of Charlotte's false accusation, Margaret's icy scorn, and the deafening silence of Eleanor and James. Charlotte stepped forward, her blonde curls limp, her green eyes flickering with unease. "Sophia, that was incredible," she stammered, her voice thin, a fragile attempt at gratitude. Margaret, her silver hair still perfect, cleared her throat, her pearl earrings catching the chandelier's glow. "Yes, well done, Sophia," she said, her tone clipped, as if the words pained her. "You've surprised us all." The praise was a blade coated in condescension, implying Sophia's heroism was an anomaly, not her essence. Sophia's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding until her temples ached, her brown eyes locked onto Margaret's, then Charlotte's, unflinching. I didn't save her for you, she said, her voice low, steady, cutting through the room like a scalpel. I saved her because it's who I am. The words landed like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs. Her hands, still warm from cradling the infant, clenched into fists. She thought of her parents, her father's sun-scorched hands picking fruit, her mother's needle-pricked fingers sewing late into the night. Their sacrifices had forged her, not the Langley's charity. Eleanor, still trembling, reached out. Sophia, thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. James nodded, his blue eyes darting nervously, but he said nothing, his silence a fresh betrayal. Sophia's chest burned, the weight of the spilled wine, Charlotte's lie and their earlier mockery pressing down. She turned, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her movements deliberate, a warrior's grace. The silver ring, etched with CL, weighed heavily in her pocket, unnoticed by the crowd but a quiet anchor to her resolve. As she reached for her coat at the door, the guests' eyes followed, their phones glowing with the story of the maid who'd turned chaos into life. Sophia didn't look back. Her words hung in the air, a vow of her worth, a prophecy of her strength. I'm done here, she said, her voice barely audible but heavy with finality. The door loomed before her, a threshold to freedom, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. The Langley mansion's dining room lay in stunned silence, the chandelier's light casting jagged shadows across the marble floor, still stained with wine. Sophia Morales had vanished through the heavy oak doors, her final words, I'm done here, echoing like a judge's gavel. The newborn's cries had faded, replaced by the clatter of paramedics' boots as they wheeled Eleanor Langley and her infant daughter out into the Newport night. The guests, their tuxedos and gowns now creased, clutched their phones, the story of the maid who saved a life already spreading like wildfire. But the air was thick, charged with an unspoken shift. Margaret Langley sat rigid, her silver hair a crown of authority, now slightly askew, her pearl earrings glinting like cold stars. Her pale blue eyes darted to the wine-stained floor, where Sophia had knelt moments before, first to clean Charlotte's lie, then to deliver a miracle. A guest, a gray-haired banker in a tailored suit, leaned toward his wife, his voice low but sharp. I saw it. Charlotte bumped her. The maid didn't spill that wine. His wife gasped, her diamond bracelet flashing as she covered her mouth. The words pierced Margaret's composure, her fingers tightening around her napkin until her knuckles whitened. Nonsense, she snapped, her voice a whip, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, a crack in her fortress of certainty. Charlotte, her blonde curls drooping, overheard the banker's whisper, her cheeks flushed, her green eyes darting to the floor, as if the truth could be scrubbed away like the wine. It was an accident, she muttered, her voice barely audible, a weak defense that crumbled under the weight of her lie. She glanced at James, her brother-in-law, seeking rescue, but James stood frozen, his blue gaze locked on the door Sophia had exited, his jaw tight with guilt. Eleanor was gone, safe with her child, but her absence left a void, a mirror reflecting the family's failure to defend the woman who'd saved her. Margaret's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her hand brushed the table, where a single cloth lay discarded, soaked red from Sophia's efforts to clean Charlotte's mess. Unseen by the guests, a glint of silver had caught Sophia's eye as she scrubbed. A small ring, etched with the letters CL, half hidden in the folds of the cloth. She'd slipped it into her pocket, her fingers trembling not from fear but from the weight of the moment. The ring, unnoticed by the Langleys, was a spark, a mystery waiting to ignite. Margaret's eyes fell to Sophia's hand, where a glint of silver peeked from her pocket, the ring etched with CL, unnoticed by Sophia but catching Margaret's gaze. Her breath hitched, a shadow of recognition crossing her face, but she said nothing. The center's door creaked open, a gust of sea air slipping in, carrying the faint echo of waves crashing against Newport's cliffs, a whisper of secrets waiting to break free. You think you can waltz in here and fix your guilt? Sophia Morales' voice cut like a blade, her brown eyes blazing as she faced Margaret Langley in the crowded Newport Community Center. Her dark hair, pulled into a tight braid, swung as she turned back to a young mother, adjusting a bandage with steady hands. The air buzzed with the hum of Spanish and English, the scent of antiseptic mingling with the warmth of gratitude. Sophia's simple blouse clung to her frame, a far cry from the maid's uniform she'd worn days ago when she saved Eleanor Langley's baby. Now, in this haven of cracked walls and mismatched chairs, she was a force, her presence a beacon for the immigrant families who filled the room. Sophia's fingers moved with a nurse's precision, her focus unwavering as she checked a child's chart. Her mind racing with the memory of the Langley mansion, the spilled wine, Charlotte's lie, Margaret's scorn. Her jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she pushed down the fury that still burned. She wasn't broken. She'd never been. Her parents' faces flashed, her father's hands rough from orchard work, her mother's fingers bleeding from late-night sewing to fund her nursing certificate. They'd built her, not the Langley's charity. This center, Hope Hub, was her proof, a place where she taught mothers to care for their babies, where she stitched wounds and soothed fears, her skills a quiet rebellion against the world that tried to shrink her. A teenage girl tugged at Sophia's sleeve, holding up a drawing of a stork. "For you, Miss Sophia," she said, her smile bright. Sophia knelt, her heart softening, her fingers brushing the paper. "Gracias, pequeña," she said, her voice warm, a shield against the ache of Margaret's presence. She pinned the drawing to a wall covered with thank you notes, a constellation of trust from a community that saw her, not as a maid, but as a healer. Margaret stood frozen, her silver hair catching the dim light, her pearl earrings glinting like accusations. Charlotte lingered behind, her scarf slipping, her green eyes darting to the floor, unable to meet Sophia's gaze. Sophia stood, her braids swaying, her eyes sweeping the room. A man in a worn jacket thanked her for helping his wife through a fever. A grandmother pressed her hand, whispering blessings in Spanish. This was her world, built on sweat and sacrifice, not the gilded cage of the Langleys. She'd come to Newport to support her family, deferring her dream of nursing, but here she was reclaiming it. Her hands, once forced to polish crystal, now held lives, each bandage a testament to her strength. She moved to a table, checking supplies, her fingers brushing the silver ring in her pocket, etched with CL, a mystery she hadn't yet unraveled, found amid the chaos of the spilled wine. Margaret cleared her throat, her voice trembling. "Sophia, we want to make this right." Sophia's hand paused, her pulse quickening, but she didn't turn. "Right?" she said, her voice low, sharp. "You don't get to decide what's right for me." The words landed like a slap, the room's hum fading as mothers glanced over, their eyes narrowing at the intruders. Sophia's chest tightened, the memory of Charlotte's lie, blaming her for the wine, still raw. She'd saved Eleanor's baby, not for their applause, but because her hands were built to heal, because her parents' sacrifices demanded it. Charlotte stepped forward, her voice shaky. You're more than we thought." Sophia's eyes snapped to her lips pressing into a thin line. "You never thought," she said, her tone a blade. "You saw my skin, my accent, and judged." The crowd's murmurs grew, a tide of support for Sophia, their healer. She turned back to her work, her hands steady, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. The ring in her pocket felt heavier, a secret waiting to unfold, its silver glint a spark in the dim light. The center's windows rattled, the Newport wind howling outside, carrying the salt of the sea and the promise of truce yet to surface. "Words don't erase lies," Sophia Morales snapped, her brown eyes flashing like sharpened steel as she faced Margaret Langley in the Hope Hub's crowded clinic. Her braids swung as she turned, handing a bottle of formula to a young mother, her hands steady despite the fury coiling in her chest. The community center buzzed with life, children laughing, mothers whispering thanks in Spanish, the air thick with antiseptic and trust. Sophia's simple blouse was a stark contrast to the maid's uniform she'd shed days ago when she'd saved Eleanor Langley's baby and walked out of their gilded world. Now Margaret stood before her, her silver hair catching the dim light, her pearl earrings glinting like relics of a world Sophia had rejected. Charlotte lingered behind, her scarf slipping, her green eyes darting to the floor, her blonde curls limp with shame. Margaret's lips parted, her voice trembling. "Sophia, we were cruel. I'm sorry for the wine, for everything." The apology was a crack in her armor, her hands twisting her purse until her knuckles whitened. Charlotte shuffled forward, her voice barely a whisper. I lied about the spill. I was wrong. The words were a splinter, sharp but frail, unable to undo the wound of her accusation. Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. She remembered the Langley dining room, the spilled wine, Charlotte's venom, Margaret's scorn, and the silence of Eleanor and James. Her fingers tightened around the formula bottle, her heart pounding with the memory of her parents. Her father's hands, scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from late-night sewing. Their sacrifices had forged her strength, not the Langley's pity. Sorry doesn't fix it, Sophia said, her voice low, cutting like a blade. You judged me, my skin, my roots, before you knew me. The mothers around her nodded, their eyes narrowing at the intruders, a silent wall of support. Margaret's face flushed, her composure crumbling. We want to make it right, she said, her voice cracking. Please tell us how. Sophia's eyes narrowed, her pulse racing. She set the bottle down, her movements deliberate, and crossed her arms. You want to make it right? She said, her tone a challenge. Support this place. Fund the clinic. Help these families you've never seen. The words were a gauntlet, thrown with the weight of her worth, a demand for action over empty words. Charlotte's lips parted, but Sophia cut her off. Not just money, time. Work here. See the people you mocked. The room stilled, the mothers watching, their whispers fading. Margaret nodded, her hands trembling. We will, she said, her voice soft but firm. We'll do it. Charlotte's eyes widened, her scarf slipping further. But she nodded, her face pale. Sophia's chest tightened, her resolve a steel core. But a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Could they change? She pushed it aside, her focus returning to a child tugging at her sleeve, his smile a reminder of why she fought. As Sophia turned to grab a bandage, her hand brushed her pocket, and the silver ring, etched with CL, slipped out, clinking onto the table. The sound was faint, but Charlotte's gasp cut through the hum. That ring, she stammered, her green eyes wide, her hand reaching out but stopping short. Where did you get it? Sophia frowned, her fingers closing around the ring, its weight heavy with mystery. Found it, she said, her voice sharp. When I was cleaning your mess. Charlotte's face paled, her breath hitching. It's Cecilia's. Our aunt. She was... Her voice trailed off, her eyes darting to Margaret, who froze, her pearl earrings still as if time had stopped. Sophia's heart skipped, her fingers tightening on the ring. Who's Cecilia? She asked, her voice low, probing. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flickering with something. Fear, shame, a secret buried deep. Nobody, she said too quickly, her voice a whip. But Sophia's gaze didn't waver, her instincts flaring. The mothers watched, sensing the shift, their whispers a rising tide. Sophia slipped the ring back into her pocket, her heart pounding with questions. Cecilia, whoever she was a thread she'd pull, a truth waiting to unravel. The clinic's door creaked, a gust of Newport's salty air slipping in, carrying the faint crash of waves against the cliffs. A promise of secrets ready to break. Keep your hands off our secrets, girl, Victor's voice hissed like a snake, his weathered face twisting as he loomed over Sophia Morales in the dim corridor of the Langley mansion. The old butler's eyes, cold and gray, bored into her, his gnarled hands clutching a ring of keys that jangled like a warning. Sophia's pulse hammered, her fingers tightening around the silver ring etched with CL, the mysterious relic she'd found when cleaning Charlotte's spilled wine. She'd returned to the mansion to collect her final paycheck, but Victor's ambush, moments after her tense meeting with Margaret and Charlotte at the Hope Hub, felt like a trap. Her braids swung as she stepped back, her brown eyes narrowing, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. You don't belong here, Victor snapped, cutting her off before she could speak. That ring? It's none of your business. His voice was a blade, sharp with the weight of something hidden, his stooped frame blocking the hallway to the servants' quarters. Sophia's heart pounded, her mind flashing to Margaret's flinch when Charlotte recognized the ring as Cecilia Langley's. Who's Cecilia? Sophia demanded, her voice low, steady, a challenge that made Victor's lips curl. Nobody you need to know, he barked, his keys jangling as he stepped closer, his breath sour with menace. Give it to me, now. Sophia's fingers closed tighter around the ring, her knuckles whitening. She'd faced scorn before, Charlotte's lie about the wine, Margaret's icy insults. But Victor's hostility was different, a raw edge that hinted at a deeper wound. Her parents' faces surged in her memory, her father's hands scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She wasn't just a maid to be bullied. I found it, she said, her voice cutting like a knife. It's mine until I know why it matters. Victor's eyes flashed, his hand darting out to grab her wrist. But Sophia yanked back, her heels scraping the floor, her heart racing with defiance. You're digging into things that'll bury you, Victor growled, his voice a low rumble, his fingers twitching as if ready to strike. Sophia's chest burned, her breath shallow, but she held her ground, her eyes locked on his. She remembered the Hope Hub, the mothers who trusted her, the child's drawing pinned to the wall. She was more than their servant, more than their scapegoat. Threaten me again, she said, her tone sharp, and I'll scream this place down. Victor froze, his keys stilling, his face paling as footsteps echoed from the main hall, Margaret's voice calling for a servant. Sophia's hand slipped into her pocket, the ring's cold metal grounding her. Victor's gaze followed, his jaw tightening, a flicker of fear crossing his weathered features. You don't know what you're stirring up, he muttered, his voice barely audible, his eyes darting to the shadows of the corridor. Cecilia's gone. Let her stay gone. The name hung heavy, a spark igniting Sophia's curiosity. She'd heard Charlotte's gasp, seen Margaret's flinch. Victor's desperation only sharpened her resolve. She stepped past him, her heels clicking with purpose, her braids swaying like a banner of defiance. Margaret appeared at the corridor's end, her silver hair glinting, her pearl earrings swaying. Sophia? She called, her voice trembling with unease. Sophia didn't answer, her heart pounding with questions about Cecilia, about Victor's fear. She clutched the ring, its edges biting into her palm, a secret she'd unravel no matter the cost. Victor's eyes followed her, his keys jangling once more, a faint clink that echoed like a lock snapping shut. You're chasing ghosts, Sophia, and they'll drag you down. Victor's hissed warning echoed in Sophia Morales' mind as she slammed the door of the Newport Community Library, her braids swinging, her brown eyes blazing with defiance. Her fingers clutched the silver ring etched with CL, its cold metal a burning question since Victor's ambush in the Langley Mansion's corridor. The old butler's threat, his desperate grab for the ring, had ignited a fire in her gut. A need to uncover who Cecilia Langley was and why her name made Margaret flinch and Charlotte pale. Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she stormed into the library's dusty archive room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and secrets. Luis, the local teacher who'd caught her eye at the Hope Hub, followed close, his dark eyes sharp with concern, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. You sure about this? He asked, his voice low, steady, a lifeline in the storm of her resolve. Sophia's lips pressed tight, her heart pounding with the memory of her parents, her father's hands, scarred from orchard work, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She wasn't just a maid, not anymore. She'd saved Eleanor's baby, faced down the Langleys' scorn, and now she'd unravel their lies. I'm sure, she said, her voice ablade. Victor's hiding something. This ring proves it. She yanked open a drawer of yellowed files, her hands moving with a nurse's precision, her pulse racing as she scanned faded labels. The library was a maze of forgotten records, but Sophia's instincts, honed by years of navigating spaces that didn't want her, guided her to a box marked Langley Estate 1970s. Luis knelt beside her, his fingers brushing hers as he pulled out a ledger, his brow furrowing. Cecilia Langley, he read, his voice catching, disinherited, 1975. Married a Mexican immigrant, erased from the family. Sophia's breath hitched, her fingers tightening on the ring. Like me, she whispered, her heart thumping with a connection she couldn't shake. The ledger's pages crackled as she turned them, her eyes scanning handwritten notes. Cecilia had been vibrant, a painter, her work sold to fund the Langley empire, until she fell in love with Javier, a farm worker. Margaret, then a young matriarch, had branded her a disgrace, stripping her inheritance. Victor's name appeared, scrawled as a witness to legal documents, his loyalty to Margaret sealed in ink. Sophia's chest burned, her fingers trembling as she traced the words. "They stole her life," she said, her voice low, sharp. "Victor helped bury her." Luis nodded, his hand grazing her shoulder, a quiet anchor. "There's more," he said, pulling out a faded photo. Cecilia, smiling, her arm around a man with Sophia's brown skin, her dark hair. Sophia's heart skipped, her mind racing. The ring, Cecilia's ring, wasn't just a trinket, it was a key to a betrayal. She slammed the ledger shut, dust rising like a ghost. "We need to know what they took," she said, her voice a whip. Luis grabbed another file, his eyes narrowing. "Financial records," he said, flipping pages. "Cecilia's art sales, hundreds of thousands, diverted to the Langley Trust." Victor signed off. Sophia's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. "They didn't just disown her," she said. "They robbed her." She stormed to a computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keys, searching public records. Luis stood close, his voice urgent. "If Victor's scared, he's protecting someone." Sophia nodded, her eyes locked on the screen. A newspaper clipping flashed up. 1976, Cecilia's disappearance after a public fight with Margaret. No trace, no follow-up. Sophia's pulse hammered, her mind flashing to Victor's gray eyes, his trembling hands. "He knows where she went," she said, her voice a low growl. "He's guarding their shame." They moved to a back shelf, pulling out a box of estate correspondence. Sophia's hands shook as she found a letter, sealed but brittle, addressed to "My son" in Cecilia's looping script. She tore it open, her breath shallow, her heart pounding with the weight of discovery. The letter spoke of pain, of Margaret's cruelty, of Victor forging papers to seize Cecilia's share of the family fortune. "They left me with nothing," Cecilia wrote, her words a knife in Sophia's chest. "But I'll fight for you." Sophia's fingers clenched the paper, her eyes burning with fury, her connection to Cecilia, a woman cast out like her, sealing her resolve. Luis grabbed her arm, his voice sharp. "Sophia, we're close, but Victor's dangerous. He'll come for this." Sophia nodded, her hand slipping to her pocket, the ring's edges biting her palm. She'd faced Charlotte's lies, Margaret's scorn, and now Victor's threats. She wasn't backing down. "Let him try," she said, her voice a blade, her braids swinging as she stood. The library's lights flickered, casting shadows over the files, the letter in her hand a burning torch. "You can't undo what's buried, Sophia." Victor's threat rang in Sophia Morales' ears as she clutched Cecilia Langley's letter, her fingers trembling, the brittle paper crumpling under her grip. The Newport Library's archive room was a tomb of secrets, the air heavy with dust and betrayal. Her brown eyes burned, her braids swinging as she paced, the silver ring etched with CL, a searing weight in her pocket. Luis, her ally and the local teacher, stood close, his dark eyes scanning the letter, his jaw tight. The words of Cecilia, a woman disowned by the Langleys for loving a Mexican immigrant, cut like a blade, exposing a wound that mirrored Sophia's own. Her heart pounded, her teeth grinding as she read again. "They left me with nothing. Margaret and Victor stole my future." Sophia's chest burned, her pulse hammering with fury. The letter, found in a forgotten box, revealed the truth. Margaret Langley, with Victor's help, had forged documents to seize Cecilia's inheritance. Her art sales funneled into the family's empire. Cecilia's love for Javier, a farm worker, had been her crime, her banishment a calculated erasure. Sophia's mind flashed to her own parents, her father's hands, scarred from orchards, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. "They didn't just disown her," Sophia said, her voice a low growl, sharp as a knife. "They robbed her life." Luis nodded, his hand brushing her arm, his voice steady, and Victor's still guarding their lie. She slammed the letter onto the table, dust rising like a ghost. Her eyes locked on a faded signature. Victor's, scrawled on a legal note attached to Cecilia's disinheritance papers. He knew, Sophia said, her voice cutting through the silence. He helped Margaret bury her. Her fingers tightened on the ring, its edges biting her palm, a spark of Cecilia's defiance. Louis grabbed a file, his hands swift, pulling out a bank record. Look, he said, his voice urgent. 1976, a transfer, hundreds of thousands from Cecilia's art to the Langley Trust. Victor's name is all over it. Sophia's breath caught, her heart thumping with the weight of the betrayal. They built their wealth on her pain, she said, her tone a blade, her eyes blazing. She stormed to a shelf, yanking out another box, her hands moving with a nurse's precision. A photograph slipped out. Cecilia, radiant, standing with Javier and a baby boy, their smiles defiant. Sophia's chest tightened, her mind racing. Her son, she whispered, her voice cracking. They took everything from him, too. The letter's final words burned in her mind. I'll fight for you. Cecilia had vanished, but her son was out there, a living thread of the Langley's shame. Sophia's resolve hardened, her heart pounding with a vow to right this wrong, to give Cecilia's story the justice her own family deserved. Louis grabbed her shoulder, his voice sharp. Victor's not done. If he knows you have this, he'll come for you. Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. She remembered Victor's gray eyes, his trembling hands, his hissed threats in the mansion's corridor. Let him, she said, her voice a whip. I'm not afraid. Her fingers closed around the letter, folding it with care. A weapon against the Langley's lies. She slipped it into her pocket with the ring, her heart a drumbeat of defiance, her mind already mapping the next step. Finding Cecilia's son, exposing the truth. The library's door creaked, a shadow flickering in the hallway, the faint clink of keys echoing like a warning. Victor's presence loomed, his secrets unraveling. The Newport night outside whispering of a reckoning ready to strike. You'll regret digging into our dirt, girl. Victor's growl sliced through the musty air of the Langley mansion's storage room, his gray eyes glinting like knives as he lunged at Sophia Morales. Her braid whipped as she dodged, her heart slamming against her ribs, her fingers clutching Cecilia Langley's letter and the silver ring etched with CL. The old butler's keys jangled in his fist, his weathered face twisted with rage, his stooped frame blocking the only exit. Sophia had slipped into the mansion at dawn, driven by the truth she'd uncovered in the library. Margaret and Victor's theft of Cecilia's inheritance, a betrayal that mirrored her own scars. Now Victor's ambush trapped her, his voice a venomous hiss. Give me that letter. Now! Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. Never, she spat, her voice a blade, her brown eyes blazing. Her mind flashed to her parents, her father's hands scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She'd saved Eleanor's baby, faced Charlotte's lies, and now she'd fight for Cecilia's justice. Victor stepped closer, his keys swinging like a weapon, cutting off her reply. You're nothing here, he snarled. A maid meddling in things she can't understand. His hand shot out, grabbing for the letter, but Sophia twisted away, her heels scraping the dusty floor, her pulse a war drum. The storage room was a maze of crates and shadows, the air thick with the scent of mold and secrets. Sophia's back hit a shelf, papers fluttering like ghosts. I understand enough, she said, her voice sharp, her hand shielding the letter. You and Margaret stole Cecilia's life. Victor's face darkened, his lips curling. She was a disgrace, he barked, his keys jangling as he lunged again, knocking a box to the floor, its contents spilling. Old photos, deeds, proof of Cecilia's erased legacy. Sophia's heart raced, her fingers tightening on the letter, its words burning in her mind. They left me with nothing. Victor's hand clamped her wrist, his grip iron, his breath sour. You'll disappear like she did, he hissed, yanking her toward a heavy door. Sophia's free hand shot out, grabbing a crate's edge, her nails digging into wood, her body straining. Let go, she shouted, her voice echoing, her braids swinging as she kicked his shin. Victor grunted, his grip loosening, but he slammed the door shut, the lock clicking like a gunshot. Sophia's chest heaved, her breath shallow, her mind racing. She was trapped. The letter and ring her only weapons. Her resolve a steel core forged by years of scorn. She scanned the room, her eyes catching a rusty crowbar leaning against a crate. Her fingers closed around it, her knuckles whitening, her heart pounding with defiance. "You can't silence me," she said, her voice low, cutting. Victor laughed, a cold, jagged sound, his keys jangling as he stepped closer. "You're alone, girl," he said, his voice a whip. "Nobody's coming." But Sophia's lips pressed tight, her eyes narrowing. She remembered the Hope Hub, the mothers who trusted her, and the child's stork drawing pinned to the wall. She wasn't alone. She carried her parents' strength, Cecilia's truth. Sophia swung the crowbar, not to strike, but to smash a crate, papers spilling like a flood. Victor flinched, his eyes widening, his keys dropping with a clatter. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking. But Sophia kept moving, her hands tearing through documents. Finding a sealed envelope marked Cecilia Langley Private. Her heart skipped, her fingers ripping it open, revealing a contract. Proof of Margaret's forgery, Victor's signature scrawled at the bottom. "This ends now," Sophia said, her voice ablade, her braids swaying as she faced him, the crowbar still in hand. Victor's face paled, his hands trembling, his eyes darting to the door. Footsteps echoed outside. Luis, her ally, banging on the lock, his voice sharp. "Sophia, hold on!" Sophia's pulse surged, her resolve unyielding, the letter and contract clutched tight. Victor's keys lay scattered, his power crumbling, the truth of fire she'd carry into the light. "You'll never leave this room with that!" Victor's voice was a guttural snarl, his gray eyes wild as he lunged for the contract in Sophia Morales' hands. The Langley Mansion's storage room was a battlefield of shadows, papers strewn across the dusty floor like fallen soldiers. Sophia's braid whipped as she dodged, her heart slamming against her ribs, her fingers clutching the damning document. Proof of Margaret Langley and Victor's theft of Cecilia Langley's inheritance. The silver ring etched with CL burned in her pocket, a spark of truth she'd carried since the night of Charlotte's lie about the spilled wine. Her jaw clenched, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed, her brown eyes blazing with defiance. "Back off!" Sophia snapped, her voice ablade, her free hand gripping the rusty crowbar she'd used to smash open crates. Victor's keys lay scattered, his weathered face twisted with panic, his stooped frame trembling as he blocked the locked door. "You're a maid, nothing more," he barked, cutting her off, his voice a whip. "You think you can ruin us?" Sophia's chest burned, her breath sharp, her mind flashing to her parents. Her father's hands, scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers, bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She'd saved Eleanor's baby, faced Charlotte's lies, and now she'd fight for Cecilia's justice. She ducked behind a shelf, her heels scraping the floor, her hands tearing through a crate's contents. Ledgers, letters, a leather-bound journal marked Cecilia Langley. Her pulse raced, her fingers ripping it open, pages crackling like gunfire. The journal's words hit like a punch. "Margaret ordered Victor to forge my signature. They took my art, my money, my son's future." Sophia's heart thumped, her eyes scanning Cecilia's desperate script, detailing how Victor had locked her paintings in the mansion's vault, how Margaret had erased her from the family to protect their empire. "They stole her life," Sophia whispered, her voice a low growl, her hands trembling with fury. Victor lunged again, his arm grazing her shoulder, but Sophia swung the crowbar, slamming it against a crate, wood splintering. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice echoing, her braids swinging like a banner of defiance. Victor stumbled, his face paling, his keys forgotten. The door rattled. Luis, her ally, pounding from the other side, his voice sharp. "Sophia, I'm here!" Sophia's heart surged, her resolve a steel core. She dove for another box, her fingers clawing through papers, finding a sealed deed. Proof that Cecilia's art sales, worth millions, had been funneled into the Langley Trust under Victor's forged signatures. "You're done, Victor," Sophia said, her voice cutting like a knife, her eyes locked on his. This proves everything. Victor's lips curled, his voice a hiss. You'll pay for this, girl. He grabbed a heavy ledger, hurling it at her, but Sophia ducked, the book crashing into a shelf, papers raining down. She clutched the deed and journal, her knuckles whitening, her mind racing. She needed one more piece, something undeniable. Her eyes caught a glint in the debris, a locked metal box, half hidden under a crate, its latch engraved with Langley Trust. Sophia dropped to her knees, her crowbar prying the lock, metal groaning under her force. Victor rushed forward, his hands clawing for the box, but a shout stopped him cold. "Victor, stop!" Charlotte Langley burst through the door, Luis behind her, his dark eyes blazing, a crowbar of his own in hand. Charlotte's blonde curls were disheveled, her green eyes wide with shock, her scarf gone. "I heard everything," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Sophia's right. You betrayed Cecilia." Victor froze, his face ashen, his keys useless on the floor. Sophia's hands shook as she opened the box, revealing a stack of contracts, each bearing Cecilia's true signature, proving her art was hers, not the family's. A letter from Cecilia's son, Miguel, was tucked inside, pleading for his mother's legacy. Sophia's chest tightened, her heart pounding with the weight of Cecilia's pain, so like her own, cast out, erased, yet fighting. "This is it," she said, her voice a whip, her braids swaying as she stood, the documents clutched tight. Charlotte's hands trembled, her face pale. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. Luis grabbed Sophia's arm, his voice urgent. "We've got enough. Let's go." Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving Victor's. "Your lies end here," she said, her tone sharp, her heart a drumbeat of justice. She stepped past him, the deed and journal her weapons, Luis and Charlotte at her side. Victor's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting to the shadows, his power crumbling. The storage room's air grew heavy, the faint crash of Newport's waves outside a rhythm of truth ready to break free. "You think you can tear us down, Maid?" Victor's snarl cut through the roar of the Newport Community Gala, his gray eyes flashing as he shoved through the crowd, his weathered face twisted with fury. Sophia Morales stood center stage, her braids swinging, her brown eyes blazing like torches, her hands clutching Cecilia Langley's journal and the damning contracts. The gala's polished guests, Newport's elite in tuxedos and gowns, froze, their champagne flutes trembling, their murmurs silenced by the fire in Sophia's voice. She'd stormed the event, uninvited, with Luis and Charlotte at her side, the documents from the mansion's storage room her weapons, the silver ring etched with CL burned in her pocket, a spark of Cecilia's stolen legacy. "You stole her life." Sophia's voice sliced like a blade, her finger pointing at Victor, then Margaret Langley, who stood rigid at the front, her silver hair glinting, her pearl earrings swaying like pendulums of guilt. "Cecilia Langley was your sister, Margaret. You and Victor forged her out, took her art, her money, her son." The crowd gasped, their phones glowing, capturing every word. Sophia's heart pounded, her jaw clenched, her teeth grinding until her temples throbbed. Her mind flashed to her parents, her father's hands, scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She'd saved Eleanor's baby, faced Charlotte's lies, and now she'd exposed the Langley's shame. Victor lunged forward, his keys jangling in his fist, his voice a hiss. "Lies! You're nothing but a meddling servant." He grabbed for the journal, but Sophia stepped back, her braid whipping, her eyes locked on his. "Read it!" she shouted, thrusting the journal high. Its pages opened to Cecilia's words. "They left me with nothing. You forged her signature, Victor. You helped Margaret steal millions." The crowd's whispers surged, a tide of shock. Margaret's face paled, her hands trembling, her voice cracking. "Sophia, stop!" she pleaded, but Sophia cut her off, her voice a whip. "You erased her, Margaret, for your empire." Charlotte, her blonde curls loose, her green eyes wide, stepped forward, her voice shaking. "It's true," she said, her words a knife through the silence. "I saw the papers. Cecilia was family. We betrayed her. The crowd erupted, their murmurs a storm, their phones flashing. Margaret's lips parted, her eyes darting to Victor, who froze, his keys slipping from his hand, clattering to the floor. "You don't understand," he stammered, his voice breaking. "She was a disgrace." Sophia's chest burned, her fingers tightening on the contracts. Their ink proof of Cecilia's stolen art sales, her disinheritance, her son's lost future. "Disgrace," Sophia snapped, her voice cutting like steel. "She loved someone you didn't approve of, a Mexican like me. That's your crime." She slammed the contracts onto a table, their pages spilling, the crowd leaning in, their gasps a chorus. Luis at her side grabbed her arm, his dark eyes sharp. "Show them," he said, his voice steady. Sophia held up Cecilia's letter to her son, Miguel, her voice booming. "This is Cecilia's truth. You took everything from her, and I'm giving it back." The crowd roared, their applause a wave, their respect for Sophia a palpable force. Margaret stumbled forward, her hands clutching her chest, her pearl earrings still. I didn't mean," she whispered, her voice a broken thread. Sophia's eyes locked on hers, unflinching. "You meant every choice," she said, her tone a blade. "You and Victor chose greed over family." Victor's shoulders slumped, his face ashen, his eyes darting to the exits. But the crowd closed in, their phones recording, their whispers a judgment. Charlotte's hands shook, her voice soft. "We were wrong, Sophia. All of us." Sophia's heart pounded, her resolve a steel core, her parents' sacrifices fueling her fire. The gala's lights flickered, casting shadows over the documents. The truth laid bare. Sophia stood tall, her braid a banner of defiance, the ring in her pocket a spark of justice. The crowd's cheers grew louder, the Newport night outside humming with the crash of waves, a rhythm of reckoning ready to reshape the Langley legacy. "You betrayed us all, Victor." Margaret Langley's voice cracked like a whip, her silver hair trembling as she faced the old butler in the Langley mansion's grand hall. Victor stood slumped, his gray eyes hollow, his jangling keys silent on the floor, his weathered face drained of fight. Sophia Morales stood steps away, her braid tight, her brown eyes blazing, her hands still clutching Cecilia Langley's journal and contracts, proof of the family's theft of Cecilia's inheritance. The Newport Gala's exposure had shattered Victor's defenses, the crowd's cheers still ringing in Sophia's ears, their phones flashing with the truth she'd laid bare. Her heart pounded, her jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she stared down the man who'd tried to silence her. "You forged her out," Sophia said, her voice a blade, cutting through the hall's heavy air. "You and Margaret stole Cecilia's life." Victor's lips parted, his voice a rasp. "I did my duty," he muttered, but his hands shook, his keys useless. Margaret stepped forward, her pearl earrings swaying, her face ashen. "Enough," she snapped, her voice sharp but breaking. "You're done, Victor." She turned to Sophia, her eyes flickering with shame. "He's gone. Fired. The police will handle the rest." Victor's shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the floor, his power crumbling like dust. Sophia's chest burned, her mind flashing to her parents, her father's hands, scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She'd saved Eleanor's baby, faced Charlotte's lies, and now she'd toppled Victor's reign. The contracts detailing Cecilia's stolen art sales were handed to a lawyer in the crowd, a woman with steady eyes who nodded. "This is enough for charges," she said, her voice firm. "Fraud, theft." Sophia's pulse surged, her fingers tightening on the journal. Cecilia's words, "They left me with nothing," fueling her fire. Margaret's hands trembled, her voice low. "We'll return what's hers," she said, her eyes meeting Sophia's, raw with guilt. "The money, the art, it goes to Cecilia's son." Sophia's lips pressed tight, her heart thumping with the weight of justice. She wasn't just fighting for Cecilia, she was fighting for herself, for every immigrant dismissed as less. The lawyer tucked the documents away, her pen scratching notes, the hall's silence a testament to Victor's fall. Victor shuffled toward the door, escorted by security, his keys left behind, a faint clink echoing like a final confession. Sophia stood tall, her braid a banner of defiance, the silver ring in her pocket a spark of Cecilia's reclaimed legacy. The hall's air grew lighter, the faint crash of Newport's waves outside a rhythm of justice sealed, a promise of a new chapter ready to unfold. You can't buy back what you broke, Margaret. Sophia Morales' voice cut like a blade, her brown eyes blazing as she faced Margaret Langley in the Newport Community Center's newly renovated clinic. Her braids swung, her white blouse crisp, a far cry from the maid's uniform she'd worn when she saved Eleanor's baby and exposed the Langley's theft of Cecilia's inheritance. The Hope Hub buzzed with life, mothers cradling babies, nurses bustling, Spanish and English mingling in a chorus of trust. Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she recalled Victor's fall, the gala where she'd laid bare the family's shame with Cecilia's journal and contracts. Now Margaret stood before her silver hair loose, her pearl earrings gone, her hands trembling with a check for millions. "We want to fix this," Margaret said, her voice shaking, her eyes raw with guilt. "This money, it's Cecilia's, for your clinic." Sophia's heart pounded, her fingers tightening on a patient chart, her mind flashing to her parents, her father's hands, scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She'd fought for Cecilia's justice, faced Charlotte's lies, and now Margaret thought a check could erase the past. "Money doesn't heal lies," Sophia snapped, her voice a whip. "You erased Cecilia. You scorned me." Charlotte stepped forward, her blonde curls tied back, her green eyes flickering with unease. She wore a volunteer apron, her hands stained from sorting supplies. "I'm here, Sophia," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm working, learning." Sophia's lips pressed tight, her pulse racing. Charlotte had joined the Hope Hub, teaching health classes to immigrant mothers, her once sharp tongue softened by shame. Eleanor, pushing a stroller with her daughter, named Sophia, nodded, her lavender scarf slipping, her voice cracking. "We're funding a network," she said, "clinics across Rhode Island, for families like yours." Sophia's chest tightened, her breath sharp, the weight of their offer heavy but suspect. Margaret shoved the check forward, her hands shaking. "It's not just money," she said, her voice breaking. "We're giving back Cecilia's art, her paintings, her legacy, to her son." Sophia's heart skipped, her eyes narrowing. She remembered Cecilia's letter. "I'll fight for you," and the pain of a woman cast out for loving an immigrant. Like her. "Prove it," Sophia said, her tone a blade, her braids swaying as she crossed her arms. "Build the clinics. Work here. See these people." The mothers around her nodded, their eyes fierce, a wall of support for their healer. Margaret's face flushed, her hands clutching the check. "We will," she said, her voice firm, a vow carved from guilt. Charlotte grabbed a box of bandages, her fingers fumbling but determined, her eyes meeting Sophia's. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'll keep showing up." Eleanor knelt beside her daughter, little Sophia cooing, her tiny hand gripping a stork drawing, a gift from a patient. "You saved her," Eleanor said, her eyes wet. "You're why we're changing." Sophia's heart thumped, her resolve a steel core, but a flicker of hope stirred. Could they mean it? James Langley entered, his blue eyes steady, his suit replaced by a work shirt. "Our company's hiring immigrants," he said, his voice low. "Fair wages, benefits. It's a start." Sophia's breath caught, her mind racing. The Langley's empire, built on Cecilia's stolen wealth, was shifting, their actions a ripple from Sophia's fire. She nodded, her lips tight, her eyes scanning the clinic. New equipment, more staff, mothers smiling. The check, Cecilia's millions, would fund clinics statewide, a network for the forgotten, a legacy born from Sophia's fight. Sophia moved to a patient, checking a chart, her hands steady, her heart pounding with purpose. She'd turned scorn into justice, lies into truth. The mothers watched, their gratitude a chorus, their babies a testament to her work. Charlotte handed her a bandage, their fingers brushing, a silent pact. Margaret joined, stacking supplies, her hands trembling but earnest. Eleanor pushed the stroller, Her daughter's giggle a spark of hope. Sophia's fingers grazed the silver ring in her pocket, Cecilia's legacy now fueling her own. The clinic's air hummed with life, the faint crash of Newport's waves outside a rhythm of renewal, a promise of a future built on redemption and trust. You can't silence a legacy, Margaret. Sophia Morales' voice rang out, sharp as a blade, as she stood on Newport's waterfront, her braid whipping in the salty breeze, her brown eyes blazing with triumph. The Hope Hub's new flagship clinic loomed behind her, its glass doors etched with Morales Health Network, a beacon for the forgotten, immigrant mothers, workers, dreamers like her. Her white blouse fluttered, a far cry from the maid's uniform she'd worn when she saved Eleanor Langley's baby and exposed the family's theft of Cecilia Langley's inheritance. Now, a year later, the Langley's empire was shifting, their guilt turned into action, their millions funding clinics across Rhode Island. Sophia's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she faced Margaret, whose silver hair hung loose, her pearl earrings gone, her face raw with humility. "You changed everything," Margaret said, her voice trembling, her hands clutching a folder of Cecilia's restored paintings, their vibrant colors a testament to a woman reborn. "We're giving it all back, her art, her legacy, to her son." Sophia's heart pounded, her mind flashing to her parents, her father's hands scarred from orchard labor, her mother's fingers bleeding from sewing to fund her nursing dreams. She'd faced Charlotte's lies, Victor's threats, and now stood as a healer, a warrior. "It's not about giving back," Sophia snapped, her voice a whip. "It's about doing right." Margaret nodded, her eyes wet, her hands shaking as she handed the folder to a man in his 40s. Miguel, Cecilia's son, his dark eyes mirroring Sophia's own. Miguel stepped forward, his hands gripping the folder, his voice rough. "You gave my mother her name again," he said, his eyes locking on Sophia's. "Thank you." A letter from Cecilia, tucked among the paintings, slipped out, its words echoing in Sophia's mind. "I'll fight for you." Her chest tightened, her pulse racing with the weight of a woman's pain she'd carried, a pain like her own. Cast out, erased, yet defiant. "She fought for you," Sophia said, her voice soft but firm, her braids swaying as she handed him the silver ring etched with CL. Miguel's fingers closed around it, his breath hitching, his eyes glistening with gratitude. Charlotte approached, her blonde curls tied back, her volunteer apron stained from hours at the clinic. "I'm staying," she said, her voice steady, her green eyes meeting Sophia's. "Teaching, helping." Her hands clutched a stack of health pamphlets, her once sharp tongue softened by months of work beside immigrant mothers. Eleanor pushed a stroller, her daughter, little Sophia, giggling, clutching a stork drawing, a gift from a patient. "Your family now," Eleanor said, her voice cracking, her lavender scarf slipping. James stood beside her, his blue eyes steady, his work shirt creased from overseeing new hires. Immigrants like Sophia's parents, given fair wages. "We're rewriting our legacy," he said, his voice low, a vow carved from guilt. Sophia's heart thumped, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Mothers from the Hope Hub, nurses she'd trained, Luis, her partner, his dark eyes warm with pride. He grabbed her hand, his fingers strong, his voice a whisper. "You built this, Sophia." She nodded, her lips pressing tight, her heart swelling with the weight of her journey. She'd turned scorn into justice, lies into truth, her parents' sacrifices into a network of clinics serving thousands. The mothers cheered, their voices a chorus of Spanish and English, their babies a testament to her fight. A young girl ran up, her pigtails bouncing, thrusting a new drawing, a heart with Sophia's name, into her hands. Sophia knelt, her chest aching, her fingers brushing the paper. "Gracias, pequeña," she said, her voice warm, a shield against the scars of the past. Margaret stepped closer, her hands empty now, her face stripped of pride. "We're funding scholarships," she said, her voice soft. "For kids like you were." Sophia's breath caught, her mind flashing to her mother's late nights, her father's dawn shifts. She didn't forgive, not fully, but she nodded, her eyes sharp. "Make it real," she said, her tone a blade. Actions, not promises. Margaret's lips trembled, her nod firm, a silent pact. Charlotte handed Sophia a pamphlet, their fingers brushing, a bridge built from shame to redemption. Eleanor's daughter giggled, her tiny hand waving, a spark of hope. Louis squeezed Sophia's hand, his voice steady. "We're just starting," he said, his eyes locked on hers, a love rooted in respect, not conquest. Sophia's heart opened, her smile radiant, her braid catching the waterfront's glow. She didn't need the Langleys to complete her. She was whole, a daughter of immigrants, a healer of lives. But their actions, their change, were a gift she'd accept, a step toward a world where worth wasn't measured by skin or status. The crowd grew, vendors from the immigrant district joining, their cheers a tide of unity. Sophia turned to the clinic, its glass doors gleaming, a monument to her fight. She pinned the girl's drawing to a wall already covered with thank yous, a constellation of gratitude. Miguel stood beside her, his fingers clutching Cecilia's ring, his voice low. "Mom would have loved you," he said, his eyes wet. Sophia's chest swelled, her heart pounding with purpose, her parents' faces clear in her mind. She'd fought for Cecilia, for herself, for every dreamer dismissed as less. The lesson burned bright: resilience and compassion shatter prejudice, building a world where justice thrives. Sophia Morales' journey proves that resilience and compassion can shatter prejudice, forging a legacy of justice that outshines scorn. From a scorned maid to a beacon of hope, she turned betrayal into triumph, giving voice to the silenced. Her story burns bright, a call to stand tall against injustice. Share your thoughts below. What moved you most? Have you faced a moment where your strength changed everything? Drop your story in the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. Thank you for joining us. Your support lights our path. Subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll see you in the next tale.